Ethan Langford had built his name on precision, control, and a heart as cold as steel. From the towering glass office of Langford Technologies, he could see the entire city sprawled beneath him, an empire that he had carved out of sheer will. Success was his language, solitude his armor. Employees admired him, investors feared him, and the media painted him as the man with everything except warmth. But behind that immaculate image was a man tired of expectations. Tired of boardrooms, power plays, and the hollow laughter that echoed at charity galas. And if he was honest, though he rarely was with himself, he was tired of being alone. Still, he would never admit that. So when his mother called him that morning, reminding him in her gentle but firm tone that he had promised her one last blind date, he'd almost refused. "Ethan, you're 35, she said over the phone. You've built your empire, but when will you build a life?" "I have a life, Mother," he replied dryly, signing papers without looking up. "One that pays for your vacations in Tuscany." She sighed. "Money isn't life, darling. You need someone who looks at you and doesn't see a headline. Someone real." He almost laughed at that. Someone real. People like that didn't exist in his world anymore. But she'd sounded so hopeful, so much like the woman who had held him together after his father's death, that he couldn't say no. "Fine," he said finally. "One dinner. That's it." That's how Ethan Langford, the coldest man on Wall Street, found himself being driven to a dimly lit restaurant on a Thursday evening for a date he didn't believe in. His assistant, Paul, glanced at him nervously from the front seat. "Are you sure about this, sir? I mean, the last one you attended ended with you sending the poor woman home before the appetizers arrived." "That's because she thought Elon Musk and I were cousins," Ethan replied, tone flat. "And because she called my company, Langfield Technologies, 3 times. Paul smothered a laugh. "Fair enough. But maybe tonight will surprise you." "I doubt it," Ethan said, staring out the tinted window. The city blurred past, lights flickering like dying stars. "Let's just get this over with." When the car stopped in front of La Lumiere, the valet rushed forward, bowing slightly as he opened the door. "Mr. Langford, welcome back." Ethan nodded curtly, straightening his suit. He walked into the restaurant, the faint scent of truffle and roses filling the air. Heads turned. People whispered. He ignored them all. He always did. "The lady has already arrived, sir," said the maitre d', smiling nervously. "She's been waiting for about 15 minutes. Ethan's brows rose slightly. Punctual. That was new. Most of his dates arrived fashionably late, as if to test his patience. He followed the maitre d' toward the corner table by the window. His usual expression, impassive, detached, slipped for a fraction of a second when he saw her. She wasn't what he expected. The woman sitting by the window wasn't dressed in diamonds or silk. She wore a simple cream dress, soft curls cascading around her face. Her hands rested over a small paperback book, its spine worn, as though it had been read 100 times. Her head was tilted slightly as she read, completely absorbed. When she looked up, her eyes met his, deep, warm, and entirely unafraid. "Mr. Langford?" she asked, standing with a small smile. "Ethan," he corrected, shaking her hand. Her skin was warm against his cold palm. "And you must be Clara, right?" "Clara Evans," she said, her voice gentle but steady. "It's nice to meet you." He nodded and gestured for her to sit. "Likewise." A waiter poured their wine, then disappeared quietly. There was a brief silence, the kind that usually hung like fog between strangers. Ethan reached for his glass, searching for the right words, but Clara spoke first. "You look exactly like the magazines," she said with a playful grin. "Except less terrifying." His lips curved slightly. "You've seen those, then. It's hard not to. My students call you Mr. Robot CEO. He blinked. "Students. Oh." She laughed softly. "I work at St. Luke's Hospital as a children's art therapist. Most of the kids know you from the tech world. You sponsor half their tablets." That caught him off guard. "Art therapy." She nodded. "It's amazing what paint and crayons can do for a child who's been through something painful. They can say things with color that they can't with words." Her voice was calm, full of quiet conviction. Ethan found himself listening, really listening, for the first time in years. He leaned back, studying her. You enjoy your work. I love it, she said simply. It's exhausting, heartbreaking sometimes, but when a child smiles again after weeks of silence, it's worth everything. Ethan was silent for a moment. You don't hear that kind of answer often in my world. Clara tilted her head. And what about your world? Do you love what you do? The question startled him. No one ever asked that. People asked about profits, stocks, mergers, but not him. He hesitated. It's what I'm good at. That's not what I asked. For a moment, their eyes held. Hers were kind, but unflinching. He looked down at his plate. I built my company after my father died. I was 21. It was my way of proving that I could survive without him. Clara's voice softened. That sounds lonely. He gave a humorless smile. It's efficient. They spoke for hours after that. About books, cities they wanted to visit, the way rain smelled before a storm. He learned she loved painting by rivers, that she hated coffee but drank it anyway because it made her feel like an adult, and that she had once tried to teach art to a group of toddlers who ended up painting her hair blue. He found himself laughing. Really laughing. Something he hadn't done in years. When the waiter brought dessert, Clara looked out the window, eyes bright with wonder. It's raining, she said softly. My favorite weather. Ethan turned toward the glass. The city glistened, lights reflected in the wet streets. Mine too, he admitted, surprising himself. When they stood to leave, he offered to walk her home. Oh, that's not necessary, she said quickly. I live just a few blocks away. Still, he replied, holding the umbrella over her as they stepped into the drizzle. It's the least I can do. They walked in silence for a while, their steps in rhythm. The world around them seemed quieter, softer. Clara looked up at him, smiling. You know, you're not as cold as people say. Don't let that get around, he said dryly, and she laughed again. When they reached her street, she turned to face him. Thank you for tonight, Ethan. I wasn't expecting to enjoy it. Neither was I. She hesitated, then said, maybe we'll run into each other again. Maybe, he echoed. He watched her walk away, her silhouette fading into the misty rain. For reasons he couldn't name, he didn't get into the car right away. He stood there, the umbrella forgotten at his side, letting the rain fall. That night, when he returned home, he didn't open his laptop or review any reports. Instead, he poured a glass of whiskey, sat in silence, and thought about the way Clara had smiled when she talked about her patients. By the next morning, his mind should have been on the quarterly projections. But as he stared at his phone, he found himself wondering what she was doing. For the first time in years, business didn't feel enough. 3 days later, he made an excuse to visit St. Luke's Hospital. Officially, it was to discuss expanding his company's charity program. Unofficially, it was to see her again. When he arrived, the air was filled with laughter and color. He found her in a sunlit room surrounded by children holding paintbrushes. One little girl had drawn a giant purple cat on the wall. Clara was kneeling beside her, gently guiding her hand. Perfect, she said softly. Art doesn't have to be neat. It just has to be you. Ethan stood in the doorway, unable to move. For the first time, the cold weight in his chest shifted. When Clara finally looked up and saw him, her eyes lit up. Ethan, he cleared his throat, suddenly feeling awkward. I came to make a donation. She smiled knowingly. Of course you did. He walked closer, ignoring the amused glint in her eyes. Do you always mock your donors? Only the ones who pretend they're not here to see me. He couldn't help it. He laughed. You caught me. As the children surrounded him, asking about his fancy car and giant office, he felt something unfamiliar, a warmth spreading through him, chasing away the chill that had ruled his life for so long. When Clara walked him out later, paint on her hands and laughter in her voice, he said quietly, "You're dangerous." "Why's that?" she asked, smiling. "Because you make me forget who I'm supposed to be." She looked at him, the softness in her gaze making his pulse skip. Maybe that's not a bad thing. That night, long after he left the hospital, Ethan realized that something had shifted deep inside him. He wasn't sure what to call it yet, but for the first time in years, he didn't feel like a man made of ice. And as he lay awake in the dark, one thought kept echoing in his mind. He wanted to see her again. Ethan Langford had spent most of his life believing that emotions made men weak. That feelings blurred judgment, that love distracted you from your purpose. But ever since that rainy night with Clara Evans, all his carefully built rules had started to crumble. At first, he tried to fight it. He buried himself in work, telling himself she was just another fleeting distraction. But then he'd catch himself thinking about her, about the way she laughed without restraint, the way she found beauty in broken things, the way she saw him not as the cold CEO everyone feared, but as a man trying to find warmth in a world that had turned him hard. It became impossible to stay away. Their second meeting wasn't planned, yet it felt inevitable. He started visiting Street Luke's every few days, always finding some new reason to be there. Equipment donations, charity inspections, even staff morale reviews. Clara saw through all of it, of course. Mr. Langford, she teased one afternoon as he stood awkwardly in the doorway of her art room. If you keep showing up like this, people will think you're applying for a job. He smirked. Would you hire me? Depends, she said, eyes sparkling. Can you finger paint without complaining? He glanced at the kid's splashing colors all over the walls and tables, then at his $1,000 suit. I think I'd fail the uniform policy. She laughed. Then maybe you're better as a visitor. But that day, he didn't just visit, he stayed. He rolled up his sleeves, ignored the paint stains, and sat down beside a quiet boy named Oliver who was painting a tree with shaky hands. What's this? Ethan asked. My tree, the boy whispered. It's where my mom used to take me before she got sick. Something in Ethan's chest tightened. It's beautiful, he said quietly. Your mom must be proud of you. Oliver smiled faintly, dipping his brush back into the green. When Clara came over, she found Ethan covered in specks of blue paint, his tie hanging loosely around his neck. Look at you, she said, laughing softly. You're a natural. He gave her a wry smile. Don't tell the board of directors. As the days turned into weeks, their friendship grew into something deeper. They had coffee at a small cafe near the hospital every evening, her with her sketchbook, him with his laptop that always ended up closed halfway through their conversations. He told her about his father, the man who had taught him about business but never about happiness. She told him about losing her older brother to cancer when she was 16, and how that had led her to work with children who were fighting battles of their own. It was there, in those quiet moments, that Ethan began to change. He started leaving the office earlier. He smiled more. He found himself listening instead of commanding. Even his employees noticed the shift. Sir, Paul said one morning, I have to ask, is something going on? Ethan raised a brow. Why? You're different, Paul said carefully. You haven't yelled at anyone in weeks. You even said good morning to the janitor yesterday. Ethan tried to hide his smirk. That's not a crime, Paul. No, sir, it's just new. That evening, Ethan met Clara at the park. The city lights shimmered in the distance as they sat on a bench, sipping coffee. She leaned her head against his shoulder, and for the first time in years, he felt content. Do you ever think about the future? She asked. All the time, he said. But I used to see it as a timeline of success, targets, profits, expansions. Now, I think about moments like this. She looked up at him, smiling. That's good, because moments like this are what make a life. He hesitated, then asked, and what do you see in yours? She thought for a long moment. Something simple, a home that smells like coffee and paint. Children laughing, love that doesn't fade. Her words made his throat tighten. You deserve all of that. She looked at him seriously. So do you, Ethan. It was the first time anyone had ever said that to him, and meant it. From then on, their love grew in quiet, unhurried ways. He brought her lunch to the hospital, helped her hang children's paintings on the walls, and even started funding an art therapy wing under her name. She didn't ask for it, but when she saw the plaque that read, "The Clara Evans Healing Studio," she cried softly into his chest. You didn't have to do this, she whispered. I wanted to, he said, brushing her hair back. You've done more healing for others than anyone I've ever met. Let me do something for you. But life has a cruel habit of testing the strongest hearts. One rainy afternoon, while Ethan was in a meeting discussing an international merger, Paul burst into the conference room, pale and shaking. Sir, he said breathlessly, there's been an accident. It's Clara. Everything else faded. The boardroom, the charts, the noise. Ethan's pen dropped from his hand as he stood up. What happened? She was hit by a car outside the hospital, Paul said. She's in critical condition. Ethan didn't wait for details. Within minutes, he was in the back of his car, his heart pounding harder than it ever had. Rain slammed against the windows as he whispered the only prayer he knew, please, not her. When he arrived at St. Luke's, doctors were rushing through the corridors. Machines beeped, monitors flickered. Ethan stood frozen outside the ICU window, watching as they worked to stabilize her. Her face was pale, a bandage across her forehead, tubes running from her arm. He'd faced billion-dollar losses without blinking. But this broke him. For 2 days, he barely moved from her bedside. He ignored his phone, his meetings, his company. Paul brought him food, which went untouched. Clara, he whispered, taking her hand in his. I've faced everything alone, but I can't face losing you. Please come back to me. On the third morning, her eyes fluttered open. Ethan, her voice was barely audible. He exhaled a shaky breath, his forehead resting against her hand. You scared me half to death. Her lips curved weakly. You're crying, she teased softly. He gave a broken laugh. Don't tell anyone. It'll ruin my reputation. She squeezed his hand faintly. I'm not going anywhere, you know. Good, he said, brushing away a tear. Because I don't think I'd know how to live without you anymore. Her recovery was slow, but he never left her side. He attended meetings through video calls from her hospital room, learned how to make her tea just the way she liked it, and spent nights reading to her until she fell asleep. When she could finally walk again, he planned something special. He booked La Lumiere, the restaurant where they first met, closing it for one night just for the two of them. When she arrived, she was radiant, still a little fragile, but glowing. You didn't have to do this, she said as the waiter poured their wine. I did, he replied. Because the last time we were here, I didn't know what you'd come to mean to me. She smiled, her eyes shimmering. And what do I mean to you now? He took a deep breath, reaching into his jacket. When he placed the small velvet box on the table, her breath caught. Ethan, he opened it, revealing a simple, elegant ring. You once told me love isn't about control. You were right. For the first time in my life, I don't want control, I just want you. I don't know where this road will take us, Clara, but I know I want to walk it with you. Tears welled in her eyes as she covered her mouth. Are you sure? I'm not the glamorous kind of woman people expect by your side. He smiled softly. I don't want the kind they expect. I want the kind that makes me feel alive. When she whispered yes, he slipped the ring on her finger. The entire staff, who had been pretending not to watch, broke into quiet applause. But Ethan barely noticed. His entire world was sitting across from him, smiling through tears. In the months that followed, Ethan's life changed in ways the world could never understand. He still ran his empire, but now he made time for things that truly mattered: family dinners, charity events, late-night walks with Clara. He turned part of his corporate budget into a foundation supporting children's hospitals nationwide. One afternoon, during a press interview, a journalist asked, Mr. Langford, people say you've gone soft. That love has made you less ruthless. What do you say to that? Ethan smiled faintly, looking out the window. Maybe they're right, but I'd rather be soft and human than cold and empty. He still visited St. Luke's often, and every time he did, the children would run to him shouting, Mr. Langford, the painter's CEO. While Clara watched from the doorway, her heart full. Years later, people still whispered about the billionaire who had fallen for an ordinary woman. They said she'd melted the ice around his heart. But those who truly knew Ethan and Clara understood, she hadn't melted him. She'd simply shown him that he wasn't made of ice at all. He'd just been waiting for the right person to light the fire. And that person had walked into his life on a rainy night, carrying nothing but a book, a smile, and a heart that changed his world forever.